Everyone at that baby shower thought it was a celebration. I knew it was a crime scene. My wife. My best friend. My firm. My name on contracts I never signed. I didn't fall apart. I got quiet. That's when they should have started running. My name is Owen Merritt. I'm 52 years old, and for the last 19 years I built something real. Merritt Architectural Consulting, a mid-sized firm in Austin, Texas, specializing in commercial design and structural feasibility. I started it with a second mortgage, a laptop, and the kind of stubbornness that either destroys a man or defines him. Somewhere along the way, it defined me. We had 23 employees at our peak, contracts with municipal clients across 3 states, and a reputation that took a decade to earn. Naomi came into the firm 8 years into the marriage. She had a background in business development, sharp instincts, and a smile that made clients feel like they were the only people in the room. I thought it was a partnership. I thought we were building something together. Looking back, I can see the moments I should have paid closer attention. The late nights she explained away too smoothly, the budget line items that never quite added up, the way she started referring to my firm as our firm, and then, quietly, just hers. But this story really begins with Nolan Pruitt. Nolan is a private investigator based out of San Antonio. 58 years old, retired sheriff's deputy, the kind of man who speaks in short sentences and charges by the day. I hired him 6 weeks before Isabel Donovan's baby shower. Not because I had proof of anything, but because I had a feeling I couldn't shake. A husband's instinct, the kind that wakes you at 2 in the morning for no reason, except that something in your house doesn't smell right anymore. Nolan delivered his preliminary report on a Tuesday. I read it sitting in my truck in a parking garage, engine off. He documented 14 separate meetings between Naomi and Clayton Harwick, hotel lobbies, a restaurant in Round Rock, twice at our house while I was at a job site in Dallas. Clayton Harwick, a man I'd brought back from the edge of professional ruin 7 years ago when his former employer tried to bury him with a fabricated misconduct claim. I vouched for him. I gave him contracts. I put his name on proposals when his reputation was radioactive. I sat in that parking garage for a long time. By the time Isabel Donovan's baby shower arrived, a rooftop event at a boutique hotel in downtown Austin, I already knew everything I needed to know. I wore a gray suit. I drove myself. I was calm the way a man is calm when the decision has already been made and all that's left is the execution. The rooftop was decorated in pale gold and ivory. 30 or so guests, champagne and long-stemmed flutes, a string quartet in the corner. Isabel stood near the gift table in a flowing dress, one hand resting on a very convincing baby bump, accepting congratulations with a gracious tilt of her head. Her husband Grant stood nearby, beaming like a man who had no idea he was an unwitting prop in a performance. I knew the bump was fake. Nolan had pulled her insurance records. No prenatal visits. No OB referrals. Nothing consistent with a woman entering her 3rd trimester. What she did have were donor receipts. Over $40,000 collected from people who believed they were supporting a foundation named after unborn children. A grief-based charity. Isabel's specialty, apparently, was borrowing other people's sorrow. Naomi found me near the bar. She looked stunning. She always did at these events, and she pressed a glass of sparkling water into my hand with that practiced social smile. "You made it," she said lightly. "I wasn't sure you would." I said I'd be here. I took the glass without drinking from it. She turned toward the crowd, scanning for someone. I followed her gaze straight to Clayton Harwick, standing near the far railing with a drink in hand, laughing at something Isabel had said. He caught Naomi's eye across the room, and something passed between them. Quick, practice, small. The kind of signal people develop when they've had a lot of practice hiding. I set my glass on the nearest table. Naomi turned back to me. "Are you okay? You got that look." "What look?" "Like you're somewhere else entirely." I looked at her. Really looked, the way a man looks at something he's about to leave behind. "Everyone in this room thinks this is a celebration," I said quietly. "I know it's a crime scene." She blinked. "What is that supposed to mean?" I picked up my jacket from the back of the chair. "I'm leaving." Her smile died. Not slowly, it just stopped like a light switched off. "Owen, enjoy the party, Naomi." I walked to the elevator without looking back. Behind me, I heard her call my name once more. I pressed the button and waited, hands steady, jaw set. The doors opened. I stepped in. The last thing I saw before they closed was Naomi, standing frozen in the middle of that golden ivory rooftop, champagne in hand, the performance she'd been rehearsing for months coming apart at the seams. I rode down alone and walked out into the Austin night. It had begun. I didn't go home that night. I drove for a while, east on 6th, then north on 183, no destination, just moving. Austin spread out around me in the dark, all glowing storefronts and highway overpasses, indifferent to the fact that my marriage was in the process of quietly detonating. When I finally pulled into a gas station off Runberg, I sat under the fluorescent lights and stared at the dashboard until my breathing steadied. My phone had buzzed 11 times since I left the rooftop. Naomi. I didn't answer. What I did do was pull up the secondary file Nolan Pruitt had sent me 2 days earlier, the one I hadn't fully processed yet. His report on the financial side. I'd asked him to dig into the firm's accounts after I noticed a discrepancy in our Q3 projections that Naomi had explained away with contractor invoices that didn't match any project timeline I recognized. What Nolan found was methodical. Over the past 2 years, Naomi had been transferring between $2,000 and $3,000 monthly into a personal account I had no access to. Separate bank, separate card, opened under her maiden name. The total, when I added it up, came to just under $74,000. She hadn't taken it all at once. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would trigger an alert. Just a slow, quiet bleed, the kind that only shows up when someone is actually looking. I stared at that number for a long time. Then something else hit me, harder than the money. I pulled up the insurance portal on my phone. Our joint policy, the one I'd set up 15 years ago and never thought to revisit. The beneficiary on my life insurance policy had been changed 8 months ago. New name in the field where mine used to be. Clayton Harwick. I set the phone face down on the passenger seat. I pressed my palms flat against my thighs and took 3 slow breaths. Not from panic, from the need to stay precise. A man who loses his composure loses his leverage, and I was not about to lose anything else. I called Nolan from the parking lot. He picked up on the second ring. No greeting, just, "You saw it." The insurance change, I confirmed. Filed 8 months ago through an online amendment. She had your login credentials. A pause. "There's more, Owen. I was going to wait until morning." "Tell me now." He told me. The second affair, not Clayton, a different man, 7 years ago, 2 years into our marriage. A project manager named Red, who'd worked with Naomi before she joined the firm. 3 months, hotel records, the whole picture. Nolan had found it buried in an old email archive he'd accessed through a recovery service. Naomi had deleted the thread, but deletion isn't the same as gone. I sat with that for a moment. 7 years ago. Our son Liam was 16 then. I've been coaching his baseball games on weekends and closing a contract with the city of San Antonio during the week, thinking I was building something solid. "She's done this before," I said, not as a question. "Looks that way," Nolan replied quietly. "This wasn't a mistake, Owen. This is a pattern." I thanked him and ended the call. By the time Naomi's car pulled into the driveway at 11:40, I was sitting at the kitchen island with a glass of water, the overhead light on, her insurance amendment printed, and sitting face up on the counter in front of me. I heard her heels on the front steps, the click of her key, the pause when she saw the light on. She came into the kitchen and stopped when she saw my face. "Owen, I can explain." "Sit down, Naomi." My voice was even. No heat in it. No tremor. She sat, her eyes moving to the printed page. She recognized it immediately. The color left her face the way water drains from a glass. "You changed my insurance beneficiary to Clayton Harwick's name," I said. 8 months ago. That was a mistake. I was updating some documents and I... Stop. I slid the paper toward her. "His name is in that field. Not a typo. Not a clerical error. His name." Her jaw tightened. "You're reading this all wrong. Then there's the $74,000. I continued, keeping my tone measured. "The account under your maiden name, at First National. 2 years of quiet transfers." The silence that followed was total. She looked at me, and I saw it. Not guilt exactly. Calculation. She was deciding which angle to come at this from. "That money is mine," she said finally. "I earned it. You earned it at my firm, on my contracts, and you moved it without telling me. That's not a paycheck, Naomi. That's theft." She pushed back her chair and stood. "I'm not going to sit here and be interrogated in my own house." I stayed seated, perfectly still. "You're right," I said. "You don't have to. But I want you to understand something clearly before you walk out of this room. I looked at her until she met my eyes. I know about Clayton. I know about Red from 7 years ago. I know about the money. I know about the insurance. And I know about Isabel's fake pregnancy and the donors she's been stealing from. I paused. I have documentation on all of it. Every piece. Naomi went very still. Get some sleep, I said, standing and picking up my water glass. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. I walked to the guest room, closed the door, and laid down in the dark. I didn't sleep much, but I didn't need to. Everything I needed was already in motion. Dennis Sloan lives 40 minutes outside of Austin in a place that doesn't show up easily on maps. A 2-acre property off a dirt road near Bastrop, with a cedar cabin he built himself over 3 summers, and a wood-burning fireplace that takes up most of the east wall. No HOA, no neighbors within earshot, no cell signal unless you walk to the edge of the back pasture. I've been going there since Dennis and I were in our early 30s, back when we were both grinding through the years that either make a man or hollow him out. I called him the morning after my confrontation with Naomi. Didn't explain much, just said I needed a few days away from Austin and needed to think. Dennis said, "Bring decent bourbon. How about the rest?" I was there by noon. He didn't ask questions when I pulled up. He was splitting firewood in the side yard, and he just nodded at my truck like he'd been expecting me. That's the thing about men who've known each other a long time. They understand that some conversations can't start until the fire is going and there's something warm in your hand. By 9 that evening, we were seated in the 2 leather chairs in front of the fireplace, a bottle of Blanton single barrel between us, the flames going steady. Outside, the hill country was dark and still. I told Dennis everything. Not the version I've been editing in my own head, but the full thing. The detective's report. The insurance beneficiary. The $74,000. The affair 7 years ago I hadn't known about. Isabel's fake pregnancy. All of it. Dennis listened without interrupting. That was something I'd always respected about him. He let a man finish. When I was done, he poured us both another measure and said, "So what do you want the outcome to be?" "I want the firm protected," I said. "My name on my own work. My assets shielded before she files anything. And I want Isabel's donors to get their money back. In that order, more or less." Dennis set his glass on the arm of the chair. "Then you need to move fast on the business accounts before she does. And you need to get Felicity Crane involved immediately, not eventually." He looked at me steadily. "And the insurance change. That's not a civil matter, Owen. That's potential fraud. You know that." I nodded. "I've been circling that word in my mind for 2 days. Nolan already documented it," I said. "Time-stamped filing. Her login credentials in the access log. It's clean. Then Felicity takes that to the DA's office and lets them decide what to do with it." Dennis leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You don't have to drive that car. You just have to park it in front of the right door." We talked for another 2 hours, methodically, the way 2 men with construction backgrounds talk through a structural problem. What load goes where? What fails first if you pull the wrong support? By midnight, we had a working sequence. Felicity files a forensic audit request on the firm's financials by end of week. Nolan delivers his full documentation package to Felicity's office. A separate civil complaint gets drafted regarding the insurance beneficiary change and the donor fraud, Walter and Agnes Holloway, and the others who'd given money to Isabel's ghost charity. That gets referred to a consumer fraud attorney Dennis knew in Austin named Patricia Rowe. "Patricia won't charge them anything up front," Dennis said. "She works on recovery. If the money comes back, she takes a percentage." "Set it up," I said. We finished the bourbon sometime after midnight. Dennis showed me to the back bedroom, the one with the pine plank ceiling and the window that looked out over the dark pasture. I lay on top of the covers and stared at the ceiling. For the first time in weeks, my mind wasn't racing. Every problem had a next action. Every piece had a place. The anger was still there. I'm not going to pretend it wasn't. But it had been channeled into something useful. Something precise. I thought about Clayton Harwick. About the afternoon in 2017, when I'd sat across from him in a conference room and told him I was willing to put my professional credibility behind his. He'd been shaken, grateful, quieter than I'd ever seen him. He'd said, "I won't forget this, Owen." I told him that wasn't necessary. Turns out, he hadn't forgotten it. He'd just drawn a completely different conclusion about what it meant. I closed my eyes and let the sounds of the property settle around me. The fire burning low in the other room, the wind moving through the cedar trees outside, the occasional shift of the old cabin's frame. In the morning, I would call Felicity Crane and set everything in motion. For tonight, I slept like a man who had nothing left to lose and everything left to build. I came back to Austin on a Wednesday morning. Felicity Crane's office was on the 14th floor of a building on Congress Avenue, all glass and clean lines, the kind of space that communicated competence without shouting about it. She had my full file by the time I arrived. Nolan had delivered it the previous afternoon, and she'd already gone through it. The insurance amendment is actionable, she said, not looking up from the documents spread across her desk. Unauthorized use of your credentials to change a beneficiary to a third party. In Texas, that's fraud, not a gray area. I want it documented before we do anything else, I told her. I want a paper trail that can't be disputed. Felicity looked up. She had the kind of steady gaze that made you feel like she was always 3 moves ahead. I'll have a formal complaint drafted for the DA's office by Friday. In the meantime, I'm filing an emergency motion to freeze the joint business accounts pending forensic audit. You'll need to sign today. I signed. Walking out of that building, I felt the shift, the first concrete weight moving from one side of the scale to the other. Naomi didn't know what was already filed. She didn't know Nolan's documentation was in an attorney's hands. She was still operating on the assumption that I was wounded and reacting emotionally, that she had time to manage the situation. She didn't. That evening, my phone buzzed with a notification I hadn't expected. Liam had posted on Instagram. I don't check his social media often. He's 23. He has his own life. But something made me tap through. The post was a photo of him and Naomi at a restaurant, arms around each other, smiling. The caption read, "Some people burn down what others build. Real ones stay standing. Love you, Mom." I put the phone face down on the kitchen counter. I understood it. He was 23, and she was his mother, and she'd gotten to him first with her version of events. That's how it works. The person who controls the narrative controls the room, and Naomi had always been better at narrative than almost anyone I knew. It was, after all, what she'd done to the firm. I didn't call him. I didn't post anything in response. I didn't ask mutual friends to explain the situation. I just let sit. What I did do was text him one line. "When you're ready to hear my side, I'm here." No pressure, no timeline. He didn't respond. 2 days later, the court notification landed in Naomi's inbox. The frozen business accounts, the forensic audit motion, the formal documentation request. I know this because Dennis called me that afternoon and said Naomi had apparently shown up at Clayton Harwick's office in a state that his receptionist later described as not calm. Good. I drove to the office the next morning, my office, the one with my name on the lease, and sat at my desk for the first time in a week. My project manager, a steady woman named Carol Dutton, who had been with the firm for 11 years, came in and closed the door behind her. "Naomi called the team meeting yesterday," Carol said carefully. "She told everyone you were taking an extended leave for health reasons." I looked at her for a moment. "And what did the team think about that?" Carol's expression was answer enough. "Most of them have been here long enough to know what's real." "I'm not on leave," I said. "I'm right here. Give me the active project files." She nodded, and something in her posture relaxed. The particular relief of someone who'd been holding their breath and could finally stop. She brought me the files, and I spent the next 3 hours going through every active contract, every pending proposal, every client communication that had gone out under the firm's letterhead in the past 60 days. What I found made Felicity's forensic audit request look prescient. 3 proposals had gone out with my name on them that I hadn't reviewed. 2 client updates referenced decisions I had no memory of making. And 1 letter, a letter to our largest municipal client, contained language that subtly repositioned Naomi as the firm's primary decision-maker. I photographed every page. Then I called Nolan Pruitt and asked him to add a corporate espionage component to his documentation. Because this wasn't just a marriage falling apart. Someone had been dismantling my professional identity piece by piece, methodically, for months, and they'd been counting on me not to notice until it was too late. They'd miscalculated. The forensic audit team arrived at Merit Architectural Consulting on a Thursday morning. 2 CPAs from Felicity's referral, accompanied by a digital forensics specialist named Ray Kowalski, who looked like he hadn't slept in 3 days and didn't need to. They set up in the conference room with hard drives and laptops, while Carol Dutton kept the rest of the staff informed and composed. I stood in the doorway of my office and watched them work, feeling the particular satisfaction of a man who has finally stopped bleeding and started applying pressure. Naomi did not come in that day, or the next. What Ray Kowalski found over the following 72 hours went beyond what I'd already documented. The financial irregularities I'd traced through Nolan's report were just the visible layer. Underneath them was something more deliberate, a systematic effort to reposition the firm's organizational structure without my knowledge. Naomi had drafted an amended operating agreement 11 months ago, prepared by an outside attorney whose name I didn't recognize, that would have redefined her role from managing partner to sole principal in the event of my extended absence or incapacity. The document had never been executed. It was still sitting in a folder on her work computer, labeled with a project code I didn't recognize. I stood at Ray's shoulder and read it twice. Extended absence or incapacity, I said. Ray pointed to the metadata. Created the same week the insurance beneficiary was changed. I straightened up and walked to the window. Austin was going about its business outside. Delivery trucks, cyclists, the usual noon foot traffic on Congress Avenue. Inside, the picture was becoming very clear. This wasn't a marriage that had drifted into infidelity. This was a coordinated plan, designed over months, with legal and financial components that required sustained effort. Naomi hadn't been impulsive. She'd been patient. So had I. The third document Ray flagged was the one that cut deepest. A proposal. My proposal, the one I'd spent 6 weeks developing for the city of Austin's new civic infrastructure project, a $4.2 million contract that represented the biggest municipal opportunity the firm had ever pursued, had been submitted to the city 2 weeks ago under a modified cover letter. My name was still on the technical sections, but the client contact, the project lead, and the firm signatory had been changed to Naomi's name. If the contract was awarded, it would have been awarded to her, not to me. Felicity, when I called her that afternoon, was quiet for a moment after I told her. "That's IP theft and contract fraud," she said. "Added to the complaint. Already photographed and cataloged," I replied. "Owen." Her tone shifted slightly. Not softer, but more direct. "I want you to understand what you're building here. This is no longer just a divorce. This is a criminal referral package. When it lands on the DA's desk, it will have teeth." "Good," I said. "Make sure it bites." That evening I received a text from a number I didn't have saved. It took me a moment to recognize the writing style, clipped, slightly formal, the cadence of a man choosing his words carefully. "Clayton Harwick. I think we should talk. Just the two of us. No attorneys." I read it 3 times. Then I type back, "Noon tomorrow. Contigo outside patio. Don't be late." He showed up on time, which I respected slightly more than I expected to. He was wearing a gray jacket, no tie, and he looked like a man who hadn't been sleeping well. He ordered coffee. I ordered nothing. I let him sit for a moment before I spoke. "I'm going to tell you exactly what I have," I said, setting a manila envelope on the table between us. 14 documented meetings with my wife over a 4-month period. Hotel records in Round Rock. 2 instances at my home address while I was out of state. I tapped the envelope. "Your name is beneficiary on my life insurance policy. Filed the same week that an amended operating agreement was drafted to cut me out of my own firm." Clayton's jaw tightened. He didn't reach for the envelope. "I'm not here to threaten you," I continued, keeping my voice level and unhurried. "I'm here because I want you to understand exactly what I know and exactly what has already been submitted to my attorney's office. What you do with that information is your decision." I leaned back in my chair. "But I want you to think very carefully about what comes next, because everything that happens from this point forward is being documented." Clayton stared at the envelope for a long moment. When he finally looked up, something behind his eyes had shifted. The bravado, or whatever had been holding him in place, was gone. "I didn't know about the insurance," he said quietly. "That's between you and your attorney," I replied. I stood, picked up my keys, and looked at him one last time. "You told me once you wouldn't forget what I did for you. I believed you." I paused. "Don't forget it now." I left him sitting there with his coffee and the envelope and whatever was left of his conscience. The City of Austin's Infrastructure Review Board met on the 2nd Tuesday of every month in a conference room on the 3rd floor of City Hall. I was not on the agenda. I had, however, called the board's administrative director the previous Friday and informed her that I had material information regarding a recently submitted proposal. Information that was relevant to the integrity of the procurement process. She'd been cautious, asked me to put it in writing, and I had. By Monday afternoon, I had a 5-minute slot at the start of the session labeled Contractor Disclosure, Merit Architectural. 5 minutes was enough. I walked in wearing a dark suit. No presentation materials. No legal team. Just a 2-page summary I prepared with Felicity's review and a USB drive containing the full documentation package. The board was 7 people, city planners, a contract attorney, 2 elected officials. I recognized 2 of them from previous project presentations. I stood at the end of the table and laid it out calmly. The proposal submitted 2 weeks ago under Naomi's name as project lead had been developed in its entirety by me. I had version control drafts going back 6 weeks with my metadata on every file. The cover letter had been altered after my final review. I had the original and the modified version side by side in the documentation. The firm's signatory had been changed without my knowledge or consent, while a forensic audit was actively underway. No one interrupted me. When I finished, the contract attorney at the far end of the table said, "Are these allegations currently part of active legal proceedings?" "A formal complaint is before the DA's office." I confirmed. "This disclosure is being made to protect the integrity of the city's procurement process, not to prejudice any outcome." The board chair looked at the contract attorney, then back at me. "We'll place the proposal in administrative hold pending review." "That's all I'm asking," I said. I thanked them, picked up my summary, and left the room. In the elevator going down, I allowed myself one moment of something close to satisfaction. Not triumph, just the clean, solid feeling of a door closing correctly. Naomi had built her move on the assumption that I would be too wounded, too distracted, or too emotionally compromised to act with precision. That was her first miscalculation. Her second was underestimating how well I understood the systems she tried to use against me. I'd built those systems. I knew every load-bearing point. Stuart Aldridge was waiting for me in the lobby. I hadn't expected that. Stuart was the firm's third partner. Quiet, methodical, always more comfortable with spreadsheets than with people. He'd been with the firm for 9 years, brought in to manage the operational side while I handled design, and Naomi handled business development. I trusted him in the way you trust a man who never makes noise, completely and without sufficient scrutiny. He looked uncomfortable, which told me everything before he said a word. "Owen." He extended his hand. I shook it out of reflex. "Stuart." I waited. He glanced around the lobby, then said in a low voice, "I need to talk to you." "Not here." We walked to a coffee shop 2 blocks away and sat at a corner table. Stuart wrapped both hands around his cup and stared at it for a moment before speaking. "I knew about the amended operating agreement," he said. "Naomi asked me to review it 8 months ago. She framed it as contingency planning, in case you had a health event. I kept my expression neutral. And you didn't mention it to me. She said you'd already discussed it." He looked up. I know now that was a lie. The silence between us had weight. "Stuart," I said carefully, "what else did you review that I wasn't told about?" He pulled a folded envelope from his inside pocket and set on the table. "Everything's in there. Dates, documents, what I signed and what I didn't. I'm not going to let her pull me down with her, Owen." His voice was strained. "I made a mistake trusting her framing. I'm trying to correct it." I picked up the envelope and held it for a moment. Then I looked at him steadily. "This goes to Felicity today. And Stuart, I need you to understand that what comes next will be uncomfortable." "I know," he muttered. "Good." I stood and pocketed the envelope. "Then we understand each other." I walked back out into the Austin afternoon, one more piece of the puzzle placed exactly where it needed to be. Patricia Rowe had been a consumer fraud attorney in Austin for 21 years, and she had the kind of quiet authority that comes from spending 2 decades watching people try to lie their way out of situations that documents don't lie about. I met her at her office on a Tuesday afternoon, Dennis Sloan beside me. She'd already reviewed the preliminary package I'd sent over. Nolan's documentation on Isabel Donovan's charity, the donor records, the insurance and registration filings for the fake nonprofit. She had a yellow legal pad covered in notes, which I took as a good sign. 6 documented donors so far, she said, tapping her pen against the pad. Walter and Agnes Holloway are the largest single contributors, $38,000. The others range from $4,000 to $11,000. She looked up. "Do you have direct contact with the Holloways?" "I've met them once," I said. Agnes was calm. Walter was angry, the contained kind, which is worse. Patricia nodded. Good. Contained anger holds up in depositions. She set down her pen. The nonprofit was registered in Texas with Isabel Donovan as sole officer. Grant Donovan co-signed 2 of the 3 registration documents, which makes him a correspondent even if he wasn't aware of the fraud. And your wife, she glanced at her notes. Naomi Merritt's name appears on the initial donor solicitation letters as a character reference. I hadn't known that last part. She vouched for the charity in writing. I asked. 3 letters, sent to prospective donors. Her name, her firm title, her signature. Patricia folded her hands. That's material participation in a solicitation fraud. The DA's office will be interested. After the meeting, Dennis and I drove out to the Holloway's house in Cedar Park, a neat single story on a quiet street, the kind of home that takes years of care to look that settled. Agnes answered the door and showed us to the living room without ceremony. Walter was already seated, a cup of coffee on the side table, his hands folded the way they'd been the first time I'd met him. I told him about Patricia, about the other donors, about the full scope of what the investigation had produced, and what the DA's referral now contained. Walter listened to all of it, then looked at me directly. My wife wants to know if we'll get the money back. Patricia's filing a civil recovery action. I told him. It's not guaranteed, but Isabel Donovan's assets include a property and 2 investment accounts. There's something to go after. Agnes reached across and put her hand on Walter's arm. He covered it with his own, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Then Walter looked back at me and said, simply, "Thank you for not letting this disappear." Driving back into Austin, Dennis said nothing for the first 10 minutes. Then, that right there, that's the part that matters. He was correct. It was. The dominoes started falling that Thursday. The DA's office contacted Felicity with a preliminary inquiry. They were reviewing the insurance fraud complaint and wanted the full documentation package within 5 business days. Felicity sent it the same afternoon. The City of Austin's procurement office sent a formal notification that the $4.2 million infrastructure proposal had been placed in indefinite administrative hold pending verification of submitting authority. 2 of the firm's long-standing clients called me directly. They'd heard rumors. They wanted to know where things stood. I called them back the same day, told them where things stood. Both stayed. Naomi, meanwhile, had retained a divorce attorney named Philip Voss, aggressive, expensive, known for scorched earth tactics. His first move was a letter demanding I vacate the firm's office space on the grounds that my disruptive conduct was damaging operations. Felicity's response was 3 pages long and, by her own description, not gentle. The firm was mine. The lease was in my name. The founding documents were unambiguous. Philip Voss could send as many letters as he wanted. Paper doesn't change what the records say. And the records were on my side. Liam showed up at my apartment on a Saturday morning without calling first. I heard the knock at 8:15 and opened the door to find my son standing in the hallway in a jacket he'd had since college, hands in his pockets, looking like a man who had rehearsed what he was going to say and forgotten it on the elevator ride up. I stepped back and let him in. He sat on the couch. I made coffee. Neither of us said anything until I set a mug in front of him and took the chair across from the coffee table. I saw the court filings. Liam said finally. The insurance thing. He wrapped both hands around the mug. She changed the beneficiary to Clayton Harwick. She did. He was quiet for a moment. I posted that thing on Instagram. The caption about. I know what it said. I didn't know about the insurance, or the money, or any of the legal stuff. He looked up, and for the first time in this whole mess I saw something in my son's face that I recognized. The particular shame of a person who realizes they've been used. She told me you were trying to destroy her. That you'd frozen everything out of spite. The accounts were frozen by court order. I said evenly. Not out of spite. Liam nodded slowly. He knew. I could see that he'd already done the math on his own. That was why he was here. I'm not asking you to pick a side. I told him. I know. He turned the mug in his hands. But I need to hear what actually happened. From you. The whole thing. So I told him. Not the version I'd been curating for attorneys and investigators. The real one. From the beginning. The detective, the insurance policy, the $74,000, the second affair from 7 years back, the municipal contract that had nearly been stolen out from under me. I told him about the Holloways and Isabel's ghost charity and the fact that his mother's name was on the donor solicitation letters. By the time I finished, Liam was staring at the table. "She signed those letters," he said. "Yes." A long silence. "What do you need from me?" "Nothing," I said. "I don't need anything from you. That's not why I told you." He looked up. "I told you because you're my son," I said, "and you deserve to know the truth. What you do with it is your business." Liam sat there for another hour. We didn't talk much more, just drank our coffee and let the morning be what it was. When he finally stood to leave, he shook my hand at the door. Not a hug, a handshake. Firm, deliberate. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was the beginning of something real. After he left, I opened my laptop and found an email from Felicity, marked urgent. The DA's office had elevated the insurance fraud complaint to an active investigation. They were issuing a formal interview request to Naomi Merritt and Clayton Harwick within a week. I read the email twice. Then I closed the laptop, poured the last of the coffee, and stood at the window watching Austin go about it Saturday. The numbers were moving in the right direction. The DA's investigation moved faster than I'd expected. Felicity called me on a Wednesday morning with the kind of measured tone she used when the news was significant, but she didn't want to color my reaction before I'd heard the facts. The DA's office had issued formal interview notices to Naomi Merritt, Clayton Harwick, and Isabel Donovan. The insurance fraud complaint had been upgraded to an active criminal inquiry, and the forensic audit findings, specifically the altered municipal proposal and the drafted operating agreement, had been referred to the State Bar's Ethics Committee for review of the outside attorney who had prepared those documents without the knowledge of the named principal. 3 fronts, moving simultaneously. Philip Voss withdrew as Naomi's divorce attorney this morning, Felicity added. I absorbed that. A lawyer who walks away from a paying client mid-case is sending a very specific message about the terrain ahead. Voss had done his due diligence, looked at the full picture, and decided the exposure wasn't worth the fee. She'll need to find someone new, I said. She has 30 days to file a substitution, Felicity replied. In the meantime, nothing moves on the divorce side. That afternoon, Stuart Aldrich called me, not from a blocked number, his own cell, which I took as a sign that he'd already decided where he stood. The DA's office contacted me, he said. I have an interview scheduled for next Thursday. I know, I told him. Felicity mentioned it. A pause. Owen, I want you to know, I've given them everything I have. Unredacted. I appreciate that, Stuart. Another pause, longer. I spent 9 years at that firm because you built something worth working for. His voice was strained but steady. I should have come to you the moment she showed me that operating agreement. That was my failure. I thought about what to say. There were several versions. The cold one, the magnanimous one, the complicated honest one. I went with the honest one. You made a mistake trusting the wrong person's framing, I said. You're correcting it. That's more than most people do. He didn't respond right away. When he did, it was just, thank you. 2 days later, the story broke publicly. A business reporter at the Austin American-Statesman had been following the procurement hold on the city infrastructure contract and had connected it to the DA inquiry through public records. The article was careful, no conclusions, just documented facts, but the facts were damning enough on their own. Merritt Architectural Consulting, alleged IP theft, insurance fraud investigation, a municipal proposal flagged for submitting authority irregularities. By noon, the article had been shared widely in Austin's commercial real estate community. By 3 o'clock, I had 11 messages from clients, former colleagues, and 2 journalists. I responded to the clients first, then the colleagues. The journalist got a one-line reply from Felicity's office. Clayton Harwick resigned from his position at his firm the same afternoon the article ran. No statement, no forwarding address on file. His assistant told my office he'd taken personal leave and hadn't given a return date. Isabel Donovan's charity website went offline within 48 hours of the DA interview notice. Patricia Rowe's civil filing ensured that didn't help her. The assets were already being traced. And Naomi retained a new attorney, a quieter one, and stopped returning calls from the journalists who tried to reach her. The performance had no more audience. For the first time in months, I felt the weight lift. Not all at once, not dramatically, just a slow, steady easing. The way tension leaves a cable when the load it's been carrying finally reaches the ground. I called Dennis that evening. "It's moving," I told him. "I know," he said. "I've been watching." I could hear the fire going in the background at his cabin. I almost laughed. "Pour one for me," I said. "Already did," he replied. 9 months later, Merit Architectural Consulting was smaller than it had been. Intentionally so. After the dust settled and the audit concluded, I made the decision not to chase the firm's former size, but to rebuild it around the work I actually wanted to do. 12 employees instead of 23. A tighter roster of municipal and institutional clients. Carol Dutton promoted to operations director. Stuart Aldridge gone. He'd taken a position at another firm in Dallas, which was the right outcome for both of us. No bitterness, just distance. The City of Austin's infrastructure contract had been awarded to Merit Architectural under my name after the procurement hold was lifted and the submitting authority clarified. It was the biggest single contract I'd ever held. I visited the site every week during the early phases. Hard hat, boots, clipboard, because there's no substitute for being present in the work. The DA's case against Naomi moved through the system over those 9 months. She ultimately pleaded guilty to a reduced charge of financial fraud and theft of intellectual property in exchange for cooperation with the investigation into Isabel Donovan's charity scheme. The sentence was 18 months of supervised probation, significant financial restitution to the firm, and a permanent bar from serving in any officer or signatory capacity at a licensed architectural entity in Texas. No prison time. I had mixed feelings about that, but Felicity told me that probation with restitution and a professional bar was, practically speaking, a more complete consequence than a short sentence. It removed her from the field permanently. I accepted that framing. Clayton Harwick settled the civil complaint for an amount that covered the insurance fraud damages and contributed to the firm's restitution total. He had returned to his home state of Oklahoma and, from what I understood, was working in property management. He never contacted me again. I didn't expect him to. Isabel Donovan faced the harder road. Patricia Rowe's civil recovery action, combined with the state criminal fraud charge, resulted in a judgment that stripped nearly all of her liquid assets. Walter and Agnes Holloway recovered $31,000 of their $38,000. Not everything, but enough that Walter called me and said, in his careful, measured way, that he was satisfied. That word, from a man like Walter Holloway, was worth more than most people's applause. The divorce was finalized 11 months after the baby shower. Liam came around slowly, not in one dramatic moment, but through a series of small ones. A phone call that went longer than expected. A lunch that turned into 3 hours. By the time the divorce was final, he was having dinner at my apartment twice a month and had started asking questions about the firm the way young people do when they're considering whether something might be worth joining someday. I didn't push. I just left the door open. On a Tuesday in April, I drove out to Dennis Sloan's cabin for no particular reason. He was on the porch when I pulled up, coffee in hand, watching nothing in particular. I sat in the other chair, and we watched the cedar trees for a while. "How's the Austin project going?" he asked eventually. "On schedule," I said. "Under budget." Dennis nodded. "That's what you do." I thought about the rooftop in downtown Austin 9 months ago. The gold and ivory decorations. The string quartet. Naomi's smile dying in the middle of a room full of people who had no idea what was actually happening. I'd walked out of that building and into something I couldn't fully see yet. But I'd walked out clear-eyed, with a plan, and without looking back. That, I decided, was the only version of this story worth telling. "I'm going to start teaching a course at UT next fall," I said. "Architecture and municipal contract development. Adjunct faculty." Dennis looked at me sideways. "Teaching. Someone showed me once that the best thing you can do with what you've learned is pass it on." I picked up my coffee. I figure it's time. Dennis was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Your father would have liked that." He was right. He would have. I drove back to Austin as the sun dropped behind the hill country. The radio was off. The windows were down. The air smelled of cedar and dry grass, and the particular freshness of a Texas evening in spring. There was work to do. There always would be. And this time, every piece of it was mine.